What I'll be talking about in this session is about how the ancient Hindu knowledge provides so many ways, so much wisdom that is beneficial for mental health. It'll begin with me telling you a bit about what the view of mental health is within Hinduism, how it sits within the broader health element, and in fact the broader aspect of just life generally as a Hindu. I'll then be giving a few details about the views and approaches within Hinduism for strengthening and treating mental health, drawing on how it relies on lifestyle, herbal treatments, and particularly around the philosophy and the spiritual practices, drawing on the language used within the Mahabharata and particularly the Bhagavad Gita. And then I'll be talking about what the relevance of all this is for modern day life, and how it's been made even more important because mental health is being exacerbated by the COVID-19 lockdown. And it'll be a talk partly drawing on academic research and the scriptures, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, but it'll also be drawing a bit on my own personal experiences, my own journey. So just to begin, as you can tell, I am Westerner through and through. And from that reason, it's important for me to make clear that until recently, I mean, literally in the last few hundred years, the West saw mental health completely separate from physical health. And under the dogma of the native religion, mental health was almost seen like possession by evil spirits. It was a very negative thing. And I know it sounds terrible, but the truth is that the common treatment for it was, being drowned or something because you were thought to be a witch. And I only bring that up because of the real radical difference between that approach and ideology around mental health with the approach and the perspective on mental health that has been native in India for thousands of years under the Hindu philosophy. And that is that physical and mental health, they are integrated. You can't separate them. And so what I'll be doing now is I'll be going through some ways in which mental health has been discussed in a very indirect way through the Mahabharata and particularly the Bhagavad Gita, where we have Arjuna ji, who is in this sort of depressive state, very anxious state, because he's tasked with this really horrible situation to protect Dharma, which ultimately is what we all have to do. We have to protect Dharma, but he's in this real conundrum about what he has to do in order to protect Dharma, what is right. And so he seeks Lord Krishna for his advice. And you see this question and answer between the two of them as Lord Krishna basically gives Arjuna the knowledge and ultimately the tools to then overcome his anxiety and his depression so that he can fight to protect Dharma. So, as I mentioned, the fact that physical and mental health are interconnected. So in the Bhagavad Gita, you hear Lord Krishna talking about how moderate yoga, asanas, moderate exercise, sleep, and recreation are all important for sound mental state. And you only have to look at how yoga asanas, which is the postures, which are one element in that progression towards enlightenment or moksha, as we know within Hinduism, that the growth in that yoga asanas part of that progression towards realization has just absolutely exploded around the world. So between 2012 and 2016, the number of people practicing yoga asanas grew by 50%. And in the demographic of people aged 50 plus, it exploded by 300% across the world. So it's just very obvious how powerful yoga asanas are. And there are many clinical studies showing that yoga asanas help to reduce blood pressure, heart rate, cholesterol, and blood glucose. There are clinical trials showing statistically significant differences, improvements because of doing yoga asanas. So there's a physical benefit, certainly, but there is also the mental benefit. And again, that's been proven through clinical trials, statistically significant reduction in anxiety symptoms, reduction in obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms, and improvement in depression symptoms. And one of the things that I think is really important to appreciate is that Hinduism views your physical body as almost like a gift, that we are all part of this single consciousness. We're all connected, and our Atman, our true inner self, takes form within a physical body. But that physical body is a gift, and it is our duty to keep our vehicle, our bodies, in really good shape, because that is the way that we can then carry out our duties. This, for me recently, this really became clear when I was in Bharat, or India, just before the lockdown. And everyone in India, right towards just before the lockdown, was wearing masks, everyone on the plane. And yet when we landed then in the UK, nobody was wearing masks. And it just made me really appreciate how much Hindus really are grateful for their body, for their life. I think this touches in on a broader subject of just how much Hinduism celebrates life. It doesn't take it for granted, which actually many people in the West do. When I see my neighbors, having parties during the lockdown, it just shows a lack of gratitude for what we are so divinely gifted. Another aspect that the Mahabharata, and particularly the Bhagavad Gita, touches on is that it's important to understand your own unique temperament. That we are each unique, we're each gifted a balance of the elements, which then determines our dosha, a characteristic of each of us, that it determines our predisposition for certain diseases, for certain mental health instabilities, also our ability to make progress spiritually, and also what treatments are then likely to be effective for each of us. And really this draws on the idea of personalized medicine. In fact, it is personalized medicine, something that's very new in the rest of the world, really, this idea of prescribing treatments based on your unique DNA. That is something that's been practiced by the ancient rishis in India for thousands of years. And so, yes, understanding your temperament, your unique temperament, is then key to having good mental health, because until you really understand yourself, you then can't work out, well, what are the ways for me to balance myself, to balance my doshas, so that I can have good, stable mental health. And this idea of uniqueness of each of us is really key, because ultimately we are each so unique that really the only absolute treatment for each of us is ourselves. It's looking within, it's seeking the treatment from within, using internal techniques. And I'm sure many people watching, they've heard of Sadhguru. He's a very well-known and respected person in India, Hindu, and he talks about inner engineering, and that really is true, because ultimately we each need to seek within in order to bring our mind and our senses under control, so that we can experience this internal constancy and this internal peace. And I think this is very telling around what the central tenet of Hindu philosophy is, which is that, as I said, we are all connected, we are all part of Brahman. There is this greater power, but that we are all divine. When we are all divine, we all need to find our own ways to discover that, to really fully experience that. And we need to do that internally. And so just drawing on that a second, for me to reflect on this idea of us all being part of this single consciousness has really helped me to have strong mental health, is that it's also helped me to realize that we are all actually very small parts in this much larger cosmos. And so each of our worries on a daily basis are actually quite small, they're quite insignificant. They may seem very big and significant to us at the time, but ultimately, once you put things into perspective, you realize actually don't sweat the small stuff. And I find that really useful on a daily basis. And at night, particularly when I was first learning about Hinduism, I would listen to lectures on Vedanta, this idea of us being part of this single consciousness, and found that any worries, any anxiety that I was having in my head from work that day, that they would just slowly subside away, they would drift away. And before I knew it, I felt like I was completely sort of just merged into the fabric of the universe, and that's it. Before I knew it, I was off to sleep at night. So it was really the best way for me to detach from all my worries each day. And I think that is another reason why the transition for me from Christianity to Hinduism has been so powerful, because before I was always worried that I would be damned for any mistakes I had made, for anyone I had upset. But actually in Hinduism, you're never damned. Everyone is saved. Everyone is divine, and everyone will make progress to moksha. And that is so empowering. And I guess off the side of that, within Hindu Dharma, we realize that when you die, you don't really die, because we are on this cycle of life and then rebirth, and we're ultimately in this cycle towards moksha. So when we die, it isn't the end. And that has helped me to become less fearful of life. Again, not taking things for granted by no means, but as and when my time comes, it's nothing to be afraid of. Finally, when it comes to then looking at Arjuna, how he was compelled to seek advice from Lord Krishna in order to understand how to face this adversity, this battle he had to face in order to protect Dharma, it came very clear that Lord Krishna is saying to him that you need to be reducing your attachment, because ultimately attachment is the cause of desire, and that is then the cause of unhappiness. And again, somebody coming from a Western background, I can really see this so clearly now, at how attachment is such a problem for all of us, and it does create such unhappiness. And this is attachment not only to the people we love around us, because obviously we should love people, but it shouldn't be so that when they're not with us, we are depressed, for example. So there's the element of attachment to people, but there's also the attachment to material possessions and attachment to our own status, ego. And there's a really excellent epidemiological study called Western Culture, Is It a Health Hazard? And it's basically a review paper, and it pulls together all the evidence for people who prioritize attachment. So attachment to material possessions, attachment to status, how these people who prioritize these things have much poorer physical health and mental health, and it provides all the clinical trial evidence for that. And it goes to show why people who perhaps have everything that you can imagine would make a person happy, so loads of money, loads of friends, perhaps they are, a celebrity, but actually they go on to commit suicide, for example. It goes to show that having everything really in many ways is then meaning that you have nothing, because everything that you associate with your self-value is external to you. And so if there is any disappointment, any ups and downs in that external environment around you, it really can throw them off balance. Whereas someone who is very grounded, has a lot of inner resilience, who values themselves based on their inner qualities, even if they have something really terrible happen in their life, for example, a spouse dies or something really terrible, they can pull through because they have that inner resilience. And it goes to show that, again, people who really have very few belongings, who are very poor, they can have huge satisfaction and have huge inner strength, and they can really face the worst of adversities and pull right through. And I read this morning, in fact, a really excellent paper, and it was basically comparing the Western approach to psychology to the Eastern approach, particularly with an Indian focus on the Eastern side. And it made the very stark statement that the Western psychological methods, they seek to strengthen ego, to make people feel good, whereas actually, particularly in the Hindu philosophy, they seek to help people misidentify with their ego. And it is interesting that I read another epidemiological study which showed that, based on, and this was actually published by the WHO, the World Health Organization, that schizophrenia recovery in India is statistically significantly better than recovery from schizophrenia in the West. And there could be so many reasons for that. But I feel personally that a real driving reason for that is that when you are helping people to strengthen their ego, that's only a temporary fix. Because as soon as that ego is hurt again, you'll have to rebuild it up. The methods that are being used in the West are temporary fixes, whereas the methods being used in the Hindu framework, they are the true solutions, I feel, to really helping somebody to have solid, stable mental health throughout their whole lifetime. And when we are performing our duties, our karma, we must be doing this without attachment, as I just explained. But ultimately, we must be doing them. It's not enough to just shy away from doing our duties because we worry about us having attachment to them. We must be doing our duties, and actually in understanding what our duties are and then making progress towards them, that is hugely fulfilling. So if it is that you are a mother, be a mother, be a really good mother, really embrace that. If your duty is to look after your parents, do that. Do it with real gratitude, and actually it will have a huge beneficial impacts on you. And it goes to show that actually the system of having duties, and particularly having stages within life, is really important. So going back to that epidemiological review paper I mentioned about, is Western culture a health hazard? It mentions that one of the driving reasons that people in the West are facing this major mental health crisis is that they have confused autonomy with independence. Because in the past, many people didn't have freedom, particularly women. And so in the last century, there's been great strides to giving people this freedom. But ultimately, they have mistaken that freedom with independence. Ultimately, what it should be is having autonomy, having the ability to think for yourself. Whereas independence is actually you're thinking of yourself, and you're thinking of yourself as an isolated unit. Whereas if you're thinking for yourself in a system where there are moral rights and wrongs, where there are chapters within life, that is something that brings out the best mental health, this paper was finding. Whereas people who isolate themselves, who feel the whole burden of their success, of everything they do in life, is on themselves because they are independent from anybody else, any other influences. Actually, these people are very unstable people. And when you are, again, doing your duties, you need to be doing these without attachment to the results. That was another key thing that this paper was finding, that you need to enjoy the work, you need to enjoy the process, irrespective of what the results are at the end. And we need to be doing our duties with dharma in mind, with righteousness, so that there is consistency between what we are thinking, what we are feeling, and what we are doing. Consistency between our heads, our hearts, and our hands. There shouldn't be inconsistency. We should be a consistent human being. So why is all of this relevant to us today? Well, it's relevant because what I've just been telling you, although it's knowledge that's been in India for thousands of years, it is eternal knowledge. It is a universal knowledge. And it's relevant because when we look across the world, mental health issues are rising very rapidly. In the UK, per year, 1/6 of the population is on antidepressants each year, 1/6. And in India at the moment, that rate is much lower, but it is catching up quite quickly. In fact, there was another study I've read, where they looked at what percentage of poor health mental health takes up. So of all health issues, physical health, everything, what percentage of that is taken up by mental health issues? And that percentage has doubled in less than 30 years. So in a generation, people are experiencing significantly greater mental health issues. So it goes to show that that trend within India to be taking on a more Western lifestyle, it's really having some dire consequences for people. And there is so much uncertainty in the world these days. So yes, there is a disintegration of the family unit. There is this move for people to be building their own careers, to be living life in different ways, perhaps not having children, moving to different countries away from their family. So with all this uncertainty, we require this mental resilience more and more. And the coronavirus lockdown really exacerbated this. So in my professional work, where we are developing medical devices, we also provide consultancy to other medical device companies. And some of those have solutions, digital solutions in the area of mental health. And the UK government was pumping loads of money to be helping these solutions to be accessed by the population. So that was the UK government's response to trying to manage mental health during the lockdown. And yet it's so different to the response that I saw in India, where I felt the response was to stream Ramayana and to stream Mahabharata, the TV series on TV. And I was tuning in, my husband and I were tuning in every day to be watching these, because as we've just been hearing, there is so much wisdom, so much knowledge in these itihas, these epics, these histories of India, particularly around aspects that we can draw upon for our own mental health. And another way in which in India they were providing guidance to people during the lockdown, it was very clear guidance on ways to boost immunity. So they were recommending people to take 30 minutes of pranayam, to make kara, which is a concoction of like tulsi leaves, cinnamon, black pepper, ginger. So all of this, they were drawing on their ancient knowledge and giving people really clear guidance on what to do to boost their immunity. And many of these concoctions, these herbal medicines, again, there is a clinical trial evidence shows that they are effective. And yet in the West, in the UK, there was none of that guidance. The guidance was to go for exercise, certainly, but that was pretty much it. So many people felt very on their own, very lost, very scared, because they weren't given any tools to give themselves the best chance to not catch corona in the first place and then to recover from it. And finally, I just want to mention that another reason way in which I personally have been trying to strengthen my mental resilience during the lockdown is that I have been going into my home Manda more regularly. And there are so many Indian Hindus I know who tell me that they were on antidepressants at a period in life, but actually what got them through their dark period in life was going to the Manda more often, to be going to do prayers more often, to be giving prayers, giving gratitude, giving thanks to their Ishtadev, which in my case is Hanumanji. Hanumanji is my Ishtadev. So I most days go into my Manda and do puja, prayers to Hanumanji, and ask for his courage, his strength, because ultimately that is who Hanumanji is. He is the epitome of courage and strength. Nothing was ever too much for him. And I do mantras for strength as well every day. And it really made it clear to me when I was looking at my in-laws, my family in Bharat in India, that the people who were looking inwards, who were watching Ramayana on TV, who were doing more puja, who were doing pranayam, they coped through the lockdown so much better than the people who were tuning in to webinars about Western medical approaches to coronavirus, particularly on the psychology end of things. And so from my very first-hand experience, I could see that the people who were looking inwards were coping so much better. So really, this then pulls my talk to a conclusion, Because ultimately what I'm trying to get across in this whole talk is that Hinduism has done so much for my mental health, my mental resilience. And I really feel that the best wellness and best mental health for the world will come about if people would appreciate the vast and ancient knowledge of Hindus. And especially, as I mentioned, that life is becoming so much more uncertain. The family structure, the way that people are living their lives, it's in such a diversity now that people really need to be looking inwards and strengthening themselves, because ultimately that is the way that they are going to cope with any adversity in their life. And Hinduism really does have the tools for this healthy, happy world and humanity to exist.